A session from the outside, I'm sure, looks very spontaneous. There is a lot of preparation that goes in behind facilitation.
The preparation, in terms of knowing about the participants, knowing about their team, their culture, what's happening currently, what are the learning outcomes they want. A facilitator needs to be prepared for that. You can't just go with the
From your perspective, what makes a great facilitator a good facilitator?
great facilitator will have that presence in the room. Will listen, will observe, would adapt to the situation and flow with the end. When a facilitator enters the room and you see people with low energy, people on their phone, a little skeptic about what the workshop is going to all be like. A lot of facilitators panic during that moment,
So, Glenn, I'm sure there are many people out there who want to be a facilitator, and there are people from our team as well who want to be a facilitator. So, what advice would you give people, starting journey to become a facilitator? So hi guys, welcome back to Co-Thought. My name is Kayden and joining me here today with over 10 plus years of facilitation experience is Glenn.
Thank you so much, Kayden. It's lovely being here, being part of the Core Thoughts podcast. And I'm so glad, Kayden, that this is finally happening.
Yes. And the topic for today's podcast is facilitation and how to be a great facilitator. So Glenn, when people are choosing a facilitator, what do you think they usually judge first and what do they often get wrong about that?
Well, good question, Kayden. I often come across many clients and they have this one very important question. How many years of experience does a facilitator have? And somehow that becomes a deciding factor if the workshop is going to go great. But to be honest, that rarely answers anything. I've seen facilitators who are with 10 years of experience and the entire session still feels mechanical. And then you have these new facilitators who connect with the crowd instantly. Right? So it's not about experience, but more about presence. And a great facilitator will have that presence in the room. Will listen, will observe, would adapt to the situation and flow with the end.
Interesting, Glenn, but are you saying that the experience doesn't matter?
No, I'm saying that experience does matter, but it shouldn't be the only deciding factor to assess a facilitator.
So now getting into the reality of facilitation. So facilitation sits between structure and unpredictability. So Glenn, how often does a session go according to your plan?
Almost never case. You can come up with a great design, come up with a very structured flow, beautiful slides. And the moment the workshop starts, the reality kicks in. You enter a room full of people with different emotion. Some people are coming with intense meeting. Some people are not even ready for a team building workshop. And some sessions happen right after lunch. And the best thing to do is just rest it out or sleep. Well, as a facilitator, it's very important to assess the entire environment in the first 2 minutes. And more importantly, do not fight the energy or don't fight the participants, is to move with the energy and then slowly get what you want.
That's so true. I think facilitation is less about sticking to the plan, but reading the room in real time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're co-creating the session with the participants rather than just delivering the session to them.
Yeah. So facilitation looks very seamless from the outside, but I'm sure there's a lot going on beneath the surface as well. So from your experience, what are some of the most common challenges that facilitators face?
So low energy, Kayden, I think is the most common one. When a facilitator enters the room and you see people with low energy, people on their phone, a little skeptic about what the workshop is going to all be like. A lot of facilitators panic during that moment, and the thing is they start talking a lot. But the real thing is about listening, seeing, sensing the entire energy in the room. Stop pushing content. Okay, and create connections. Take your time. That's very important that you get to know people and then start with your workshop. The other challenge that I usually see is, in any group there are few people who speak a lot.
Yeah.
Right, and then on the other side you have people who are very quiet in the entire session. I think a great facilitator should keep a balance, should find ways where they can get everyone into a conversation. Yeah.
So Glenn, a lot of people can facilitate a session well and deliver the content effectively, but not everyone can create a truly impactful experience. So, from your perspective, what makes a great facilitator a good facilitator?
I think a great facilitator should ensure that everyone is part of the experience, should never look down on the participants or expect an answer from one particular individual. A facilitator needs to be humble, okay? Should ask more question than give answers.
Yeah.
Because all the great learning comes from the participants and their experience rather than the facilitator.
Yeah. So, Glenn, you've mentioned before that the first few minutes sets the tone. So, what in your experience makes a strong start, and how do great facilitators use those first few minutes to drive engagement?
Yeah, I think this is the most important part of the day for me, because this is where you get your crowd with you.
Yeah.
Right? And it's important for you to make them feel safe
Mhm.
rather than making them feel stiff.
Mhm.
And easier thing to do is maybe start with an energizer,
Yeah.
say some story, make them laugh. I usually make them laugh,
Mhm.
and that laugh is usually by telling them the story of my name.
Yeah.
Because my name is Glenn, I usually start connecting it to Fiddich, Live It, or Morale.
Yeah.
And they know, it's going to be fun and not a serious kind of a session.
Yep.
And that sets the tone. I have their attention.
So, you facilitated so many workshops at Korelate, but is there one moment that really captures what great facilitation looks like?
I think it happens usually in many of the workshops that I do.
Yeah.
Even when the activity is all about collaboration and people know that they have to collaborate, they don't. Because we put them into smaller teams, we assign them a table. They start quickly thinking, they work in silos and they don't want to collaborate. Yeah. At this time, maybe a facilitator will stop and say, come on, guys, you have to collaborate, you have to come together. But no, for me is to go and talk to these individuals who can actually be the cause of people coming together.
Right.
My part over there is just to enable them, and then when they take the mic, when they call the people together to collaborate, that gives me that high and tells me that we have done a good job.
So, Glenn, something I've noticed is that the most impactful sessions are very practical and real and not very content heavy. So, how do great facilitators move beyond that experience and, present an experience driven learning for the participants?
Yeah, Kayden, our correlate. In fact, we mainly focus on experience rather than these long presentation. Some people assume that facilitators have to show these long slides, heavy frameworks. Let's face it, we tend to forget whatever we hear, and what we specialize is in those experiential based activities. Now imagine a team is experiencing an activity and then there is a change, a real life change that occurs. Now some people act differently, some people show situational leadership out there. Now based on those behaviors is where the actual debrief comes out. We talk about what could have been better, or what could have gone in their case scenario. Now this is what stays with them for longer, and then that's where we try to get the framework, we attach the learning which stays with the team.
So, Glenn, a session from the outside, I'm sure looks very spontaneous, but there is a lot of preparation that goes in behind facilitation.
Yeah, you get in, you know that very well, because you're part of many sessions. The preparation, in terms of knowing about the participants, knowing about their team, their culture, what's happening currently, what are the learning outcomes they want. A facilitator needs to be prepared for that. You can't just go with the on the go kind of activities and then do the debrief around it. It needs to have some impact. The impact on the actual reality, so that's how it gets connected and it stays with them for longer rather than it just being a debrief around you guys did well in the activity, give yourself a big round of applause.
So, after years and years of facilitation, Glenn, what is that one moment you would say that has really stayed with you?
Now I'll say, Kayden, one of my favorite activity, which is Petals of Joy. It's about building a cycle from scratch. Now, when the activity starts, people are competing, but the end result is when the kids come inside, they receive the cycle, and the entire environment is very emotional. People who didn't open up now are opening up, are appreciating the activity. And the best part is, when I try to connect the activity to the actual cause, is by asking them now, what impact did this create? And if you would know your end customer or an end user, would you put an extra effort or create this cycle better? The answer is always yes. That's a hard hitting moment where they get to know that how important it is to know your end user, and when you have that empathy, you make a big difference.
Sure. So Glenn, I'm sure there are many people out there who want to be a facilitator, and there are people from our team as well who want to be a facilitator. So what advice would you give people, starting their journey to become a facilitator?
Well, Kayden, the journey is not that easy. I'll say you'll have to practice a lot, and practice everywhere. In front of the mirror, in front of your colleagues, or go back to your family if they are comfortable, with them. What I'll say, more than practice, it's also having a curious mind. Be more curious about everything, because as a facilitator, you need to ask the right question. And the question comes right when you are more curious about the individual. Okay, that leads to more meaningful conversation, more beautiful debriefs come in adjacent to that. So yeah, that's what I will say to the future generation of facilitators.
Thank you, Glenn, for your insights. I'm sure great facilitators aren't perfect.
Yeah, but they're more aware, they're humble, they're inclusive, and they're curious, So they listen very deeply and they ask the thoughtful questions. Yeah.
Facilitators care more about the energy in the room and the people in the room than the plan on paper.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about creating the experience for people that they remember and learn from it.
Yep. If you facilitated before, this probably feels very familiar.
Yeah. And if you're starting new, welcome to the journey.